Did you know that laundromats of ancient Rome used urine as the detergent?
Ancient Romans had no problem using urine as toothpaste, drinking animal dung for energy, and rubbing weird substances on wounds.
Civilizations that came before us with the standards of our current generation.
What seems disgusting today was just part of daily life for them.
These sponge sticks were attached to the bathroom benches. People shared them and seldom cleaned them between uses.
From filthy medicines to stomach-turning drinks, their habits were beyond gross.
I've never seen anything like this before, and as far as I know...
In ancient Rome, people didn't just collect urine, they used it to wash their clothes and even clean their teeth. Yes, you heard that right. Romans eagerly gathered buckets of human and animal pee, believing its ammonia content made it the perfect cleaning agent. The result? Laundry soaked in filth and mouths rinsed with the stench of waste. Let's be real. History is full of weird and gross things. But when it comes to ancient Rome, some of their everyday habits were downright disgusting. From using pee as a cleaning agent to walking in tubs of urine, the Romans had no shame. Believe it or not, Romans didn't waste their pee. Instead, they collected it in pots on the street. Why? Because urine, when left sitting, turns into ammonia, which is great for cleaning. People actually used it to wash clothes, scrub their homes, and even bleach fabrics. Fullers, the Roman version of dry cleaners, stomped on dirty clothes in vats of urine to make them fresh again. Imagine working that job. Yes, some Romans thought gargling urine could whiten their teeth. While it wasn't a common practice, there are records of people using it as a mouthwash. They believed the ammonia in pee would kill bacteria and remove stains. What is the most expensive and best urine for this? Straight from Portugal. Now be honest, would you try it? Because Romans washed their fabrics in urine, their clothing didn't exactly smell like flowers. Even after rinsing, traces of that strong ammonia scent lingered. That means rich or poor. Everyone walked around smelling like a public bathroom. And yet, fancy togas and bright colors were a status symbol, even if they stank. While Romans didn't drink pee, they still found ways to use it in the kitchen. It acted as a fermenting agent, kind of like salt, to preserve food and add flavor. It's hard to imagine a chef today saying, "Just a splash of urine for taste." Urine was so valuable that Roman emperors Nero and Vespasian put a tax on it. Collectors gathered urine from public bathrooms and sold it to industries. Even back then, the government found a way to make money off of something disgusting. So, next time you complain about modern hygiene, just remember, at least we're not washing our clothes in pee. If you enjoyed this dive into the bizarre habits of ancient Rome, make sure to like this post and subscribe for more crazy history facts. There's plenty more weird, shocking, and downright disgusting history to uncover, so stay tuned. Not only this, people shared filthy communal toilets, sitting side by side without privacy. Even worse, they wiped themselves with a shared sponge on a stick, often soaked in dirty, bacteria-filled water. Well, ancient Rome was amazing, but it was also incredibly gross. While we admire their grand buildings and clever inventions, the way they handled hygiene, absolutely disgusting. First off, forget toilet paper. Instead, Romans used a sponge on a stick called a xylospongium. After doing their business, they'd wipe with this shared sponge, then rinse it in vinegar or salt water before the next person used it. Imagine going into a public restroom today and finding a used sponge waiting for you. Yeah, no thanks. But wait, it gets worse. One unlucky gladiator actually used a sponge stick to take his own life. He hid in the latrine, shoved the wooden handle down his throat, and that was the end of him. Who knew a bathroom tool could be so deadly? Speaking of toilets, Roman public bathrooms were a nightmare. These weren't private stalls. They were long stone benches with holes where people sat side by side, doing their business while chatting. No doors, no privacy, just you, your neighbor, and the sound of digestion. To make things even nastier, rats and insects crawled through the sewage pipes below, sometimes popping up mid-use. And let's talk about that sewage system. While Rome's plumbing was impressive, it was far from clean. Waste flowed through open gutters on the streets, mixing with rainwater and creating rivers of filth. The smell? Unbearable. And since people often dumped their chamber pots right out the window, walking down the street was a dangerous game. You never knew when a bucket of waste might come raining down. At least they had fresh water, right? Well, kind of. Rome's famous aqueducts carried water from mountains into the city, but not all of it was drinkable. The best water was saved for the wealthy, while the lower classes got the leftover, dirtier supply. Some of it even came from bathhouses. Yes, the same water people soaked their sweaty bodies in. So, next time you complain about modern bathrooms, just be glad you don't have to share a sponge on a stick or dodge sewage puddles on your way to work. In ancient Rome, criminals and slaves were thrown into the arena, defenseless, to be ripped apart by wild beasts. This brutal spectacle, called damnatio ad bestias, was considered public entertainment. Ancient Rome was powerful, but it was also unbelievably cruel. The things Romans considered normal would be horrifying today. Get ready, because this is about to get disgusting. First, let's talk about execution. Romans didn't just punish criminals, they turned it into entertainment. One of their favorite methods? Throwing people to wild animals. They called it damnatio ad bestias, or condemnation to beasts. Imagine being tied up in an arena while a lion, bear, or tiger was set loose on you, all while a cheering crowd watched. And this wasn't just for criminals. Runaway slaves, prisoners of war, and even Christians were thrown to the beasts for fun. But wait, it gets worse. Sometimes executions were staged to reenact myths. One man was forced to play the role of Prometheus, but instead of an eagle pecking at his liver, a bear tore him apart. And in one truly sickening case, a woman was made to act out the legend of Pasiphae, the queen who, according to myth, mated with a bull. The Romans recreated this story by having a bull kill her in front of a live audience. These bloodbaths weren't just about punishment, they were also a way for the Roman government to send a message: step out of line, and you'll suffer horribly. It also helped them remind people that Rome was the only thing standing between them and the wild, deadly creatures of the world. If you obeyed the laws, you were safe. If not, you were no better than an animal, and you'd die like one. And if you think the Romans might have felt bad about this, think again. They were obsessed with these executions. The Colosseum alone saw hundreds of thousands of people meet their gruesome fate over 400 years. Some animals even became celebrities. One lion reportedly killed 200 people in a single event. The Romans may have built incredible cities and roads, but their love of violent, brutal, and downright disgusting executions shows a darker side to their empire. So the next time you think the past was more civilized, just remember, these people thought watching someone get eaten alive was the perfect afternoon entertainment. Some Romans believed that drinking the blood of fallen gladiators could cure epilepsy and other ailments. This gruesome practice turned arenas into both a battlefield and a twisted source of medicine. No doubt ancient Romans did some seriously disgusting things that would make your stomach turn. We're talking about a society that bathed in other people's sweat, drank blood, and used pee as a cleaning product. Yeah, you read that right. First off, let's talk about the blood drinking. Romans believed that the warm blood of a freshly killed gladiator could cure epilepsy. Imagine standing in an arena, watching a man fight to the death, and the moment he falls, people rush in to collect his blood, like it's some miracle potion. They didn't stop at blood either. Some even thought eating a gladiator's liver could help. Gross, right? But wait, it gets worse. Romans loved their public baths, but what they did there would make you gag. Rich people would scrape off their sweaty, oily skin using a tool called a strigil, and servants collected the gunk. Then, they bottled it up and sold it as a beauty product. That's right, people rubbed gladiator sweat and dead skin all over their faces, thinking it would make them glow. Speaking of gross beauty habits, let's talk about their love for urine. Romans used pee for everything: washing clothes, whitening teeth, and even as mouthwash. They had jars on the streets where people could relieve themselves, and workers would collect the urine for various cleaning purposes. Imagine kissing someone in ancient Rome. Yikes. And then, There's the whole eating habit situation. Romans loved a good feast, but their idea of a perfect dinner was enough to make anyone sick. They ate things like stuffed dormice, tiny, fattened-up rodents, fermented fish guts, and jellyfish. Oh, and if they got too full, they'd just vomit so they could eat more. They even had special rooms called vomitoriums for this exact purpose. Let's not forget their love for dead bodies. When gladiator games were banned, Romans still wanted magical blood, so they started drinking the blood of executed criminals instead. And some people believe that touching a dead person's skull could bring good luck. Disgusting? Absolutely. But for the Romans, this was just another normal day. Roman elites unknowingly sipped on poison as they sweetened their wine with lead. This toxic habit slowly damaged their bodies, causing madness, infertility, and even a painful premature death. You won't believe some of the disgusting things ancient Romans did every day. We often imagine them as mighty warriors and brilliant engineers, but their daily habits were full of things that would make most people today sick. First, let's talk about lead. Romans didn't know lead was poisonous, so they used it everywhere. They cooked food in lead pots, drank from lead cups, and even had lead pipes bringing water into their homes. Scientists have studied the remains of ancient Romans and found high amounts of lead in their bones. This toxic metal built up in their bodies over time and may have caused health problems like gout and brain damage. Some historians think lead poisoning even helped bring down the Roman Empire. But lead wasn't their only problem. Roman cities were packed with people, and there were no proper sewers in most places. Streets were covered in filth, and public toilets were just holes in the ground. Imagine walking down a road where people dumped their waste right out of their windows. It smelled terrible, and diseases spread quickly. People didn't know about germs, so they kept getting sick from their own dirty streets. Now, let's talk about their food and drinks. Romans loved their wine, but they didn't just drink it plain. They sometimes added lead powder to sweeten it, which only made their lead poisoning worse. Their favorite sauce, called garum, was made by letting fish rot in the sun for weeks until it turned into a stinky liquid. They poured it on everything, from meat to desserts. Ancient Rome was a powerful empire, but their everyday habits were shockingly gross. It's amazing that people lived so long in those conditions. Newborns deemed unworthy, whether sick, deformed, or simply unwanted, were heartlessly dumped in streets, trash heaps, or marketplaces. Left to die or be claimed by slavers, their fate was brutally uncertain. Ancient Rome had many shocking customs, but one of the worst was how they treated unwanted babies. Instead of raising every child, some parents abandoned newborns in dangerous places, leaving them to die or be taken by strangers. Many infants didn't even have a chance. Some were left outside the city, where they froze, starved, or were eaten by wild animals. Others were left in public places where slavers or desperate people looking for a child would take them. The Romans called this exposure, and it was considered completely normal. Female babies were the most at risk. In Roman families, sons were more valuable because they could carry on the family name and help financially. Daughters, on the other hand, were seen as burdens. Many families abandoned their baby girls, and some historians believe most Roman families didn't even raise more than one daughter. Weak or disabled babies didn't stand a chance either. Roman laws allowed parents to abandon any child who seemed sick, weak, or deformed. Instead of trying to care for them, they simply got rid of them. Even emperors followed this cruel practice. Emperor Claudius once ordered a baby girl, born to his wife and another man, to be thrown out naked, ensuring she wouldn't survive. Not all abandoned babies were meant to die. Some parents left small items, like rattles or bracelets, hoping that if someone took in the child, they might be recognized later. But this didn't always help. Many babies ended up as slaves, raised in brutal conditions. Everything changed when Christianity started spreading. Christians became known for rescuing abandoned infants and raising them. Eventually, when Emperor Constantine became a Christian, new laws were made to stop this cruel practice. But for centuries before that, Romans treated baby abandonment as just another part of life. Looking back, it's horrifying to think about how normal this was for them. Leaving babies to die or be taken by strangers seems unthinkable today. But in ancient Rome, it was just another accepted tradition. Their society was advanced in many ways, but their treatment of the most helpless members was anything but civilized. Feasting without limits came at a disgusting cost. Romans gorged themselves until full, then deliberately vomited to make room for more. Vomitoriums weren't real, but their revolting dining habits certainly were. Let's talk about something truly disgusting. Something the ancient Romans did like it was no big deal. They ate some more, and when they couldn't eat another bite, they just made themselves throw up so they could keep eating. That's right, self-induced vomiting was a normal part of Roman feasting. Now, this wasn't some weird accident. Romans planned for this. At their biggest, craziest feasts, people would stuff themselves with food and then step away to vomit. This wasn't about being sick. It was about making more room for more food. They believed eating was one of life's greatest pleasures, so why let a full stomach ruin the fun? It gets worse. These feasts weren't just about filling up on good food, they were about showing off. Rich Romans held wild banquets with exotic dishes like roasted peacocks, dormice covered in honey, and jellyfish. The more food on the table, the more impressive the host seemed. However, since human stomachs have limits, vomiting has become part of the process. Some guests even used feathers to trigger their gag reflex. Imagine sitting at a table surrounded by the richest, most powerful people in Rome, and in the middle of it all, people are casually walking off to puke. Then they come right back and grab another plate like nothing happened. This wasn't seen as disgusting back then. It was just what you did if you wanted to keep enjoying the feast. But not everyone approved. Some Romans thought this was excessive, even for their time. Seneca, a famous philosopher, called out the upper class for their wastefulness. He wrote about wealthy people who ate until they were sick, emptied their stomachs, and went right back to feasting. To him, it was a clear sign of greed and lack of self-control. And yet, this habit didn't disappear overnight. Romans kept at it, throwing these outrageous feasts for years. It wasn't until the empire started to decline that these traditions faded. Eventually, as Rome fell, so did the idea that eating until you had to throw up was totally normal. Today, when we think about Roman feasts, we picture luxury, power, and wealth. But hidden beneath all that gold and glamour was something truly disgusting. People choosing to vomit just so they could keep eating. Power and cruelty went hand in hand. Roman masters treated slaves as property, forcing them into horrific sexual servitude. With no rights or escape, their suffering was a routine part of daily life. One of the most disgusting things the Romans did was the way they treated slaves, especially when it came to sexual exploitation. Slaves had no rights, no choices, and no way to say no. Their bodies belonged to their owners, who could do whatever they wanted without punishment. It didn't matter how young or old a slave was. Rich Romans saw them as nothing more than objects to satisfy their desires. Powerful men often kept young boy slaves, called puer delicatus, just for this reason. These boys were dressed up in fancy clothes, treated like prized possessions, and forced to do whatever their masters wanted. No one cared if they were suffering. For many slaves, being used in this way was a daily nightmare. Owners could rape them, humiliate them, and even pass them around at parties. Some men even kept multiple slaves just for pleasure. If a slave refused or tried to resist, they could be beaten, tortured, or even killed. There were no laws to protect them. Even young girls weren't safe. Wealthy Romans often bought female slaves to use however they pleased. Some were forced to live in brothels, serving different men every night. Others were trapped inside homes, controlled by their masters for years. It didn't matter what the slave wanted. Only the master's desires were important. Emperors were no better. One of the most famous, Emperor Hadrian, had a young slave lover named Antinous. When the boy mysteriously drowned, Hadrian built statues and even a whole city in his memory. But Antinous was just one of many. Rich and powerful Romans used slaves however they pleased, and no one questioned it. There were no limits to the abuse. Slaves could be forced into relationships, treated like entertainment, and completely controlled by their owners. To the Romans, this was normal. To the slaves, it was a nightmare with no escape. Ancient Rome may be remembered for its greatness, but behind all the glory was a world of cruelty and suffering. Filthy messages and crude drawings covered city walls, turning public spaces into ancient bathroom stalls. From graphic insults to obscene boasts, Romans shamelessly smeared their vulgar thoughts for everyone to see. Ancient Romans were just like us in many ways. They laughed at silly jokes, made fun of each other, and, most importantly, loved drawing inappropriate things in public places. But unlike today, where graffiti is often cleaned up or frowned upon, the Romans fully embraced it, especially when it came to bathroom humor. Now imagine walking into a public restroom and finding the walls covered in rude jokes and weird drawings. That's exactly what archaeologists discovered in ancient Roman cities. In one latrine in Turkey, they found mosaics, yes, actual artwork, built into the walls that were filled with suggestive jokes. These weren't just random scribbles. They were carefully designed to entertain people while they used the toilet. One of the mosaics showed Ganymedes, a beautiful boy from Greek mythology. Normally, he was pictured as an innocent youth holding a hoop and a stick. But in this Roman version, the stick had a sponge on the tip, which was probably a reference to how people cleaned themselves after using the bathroom. Even worse, Jupiter, the king of the gods, was shown as a bird using its long beak to, well, help with the cleaning. The joke was clear, and it was meant for the men who visited the latrine. Another mosaic showed Narcissus, a famous character from mythology who fell in love with his own reflection. But in this version, the reflection he was admiring wasn't of his face, it was of his private parts. The Romans thought this was hilarious, and it gave visitors something to laugh about while they sat on the toilet. But it wasn't just bathrooms that had dirty graffiti. In Pompeii, archaeologists found rude jokes and drawings in brothels, taverns, and even private homes. Some were funny, some were offensive, and some were just weird. In Britain, near Hadrian's Wall, Roman soldiers carved a giant drawing of a phallus into the rock. While it might seem inappropriate today, the Romans believed these symbols brought good luck. So, no matter how much time has passed, one thing is clear. People have always loved writing and drawing inappropriate things in public places. The difference is, the Romans actually made it part of their everyday lives. Finally, desperate for a boost, Romans gulped down a so-called energy drink brewed from goat dung. Packed with bacteria and filth, this revolting concoction was believed to restore strength and vitality. The ancient Romans had some bizarre habits, but using goat dung as an energy drink might be the most stomach-turning. While modern athletes rely on sports drinks, Roman charioteers turned to a much filthier option: beverages brewed with goat poop. Yes, you heard that right. Charioteers, who raced dangerous horse-drawn carts, needed a way to recover after exhausting races. Instead of grabbing a bottle of water, they drank a special mixture made by boiling goat dung in vinegar or grinding it into a powder and mixing it with liquid. Some versions even added milk or honey to make it taste better. But let's be honest, there's no way to make goat poop taste good. Even worse, this wasn't just something desperate racers did. Emperor Nero, one of the most powerful men in Rome, supposedly loved drinking this nasty concoction. Pliny the Elder, a Roman writer, claimed that Nero believed goat dung helped him feel refreshed. But considering Nero was one of the most hated emperors in history, maybe his taste in drinks wasn't the best. But the Romans didn't stop there. They had all kinds of disgusting remedies for tiredness and sadness. If drinking goat dung wasn't enough, they also burned goat horns or animal hair and made people inhale the fumes. Some even believed that rubbing a wild boar's liver on their skin would wake them up. If that sounds gross, imagine smelling burnt animal parts first thing in the morning. And if goat dung wasn't available, Romans had another idea. They believed drinking calves' dung could cure laziness. Some even used ashes from burnt pig poop as medicine. Instead of seeing a doctor, people in ancient Rome sniffed and drank things that belonged in a barnyard. So, while modern energy drinks may have artificial flavors and too much sugar, At least they don't come with a scoop of goat dung. The Romans thought they were boosting their strength, but in reality, they were just drinking one of the most disgusting energy drinks ever invented. The ancient Romans built a mighty empire, but their daily lives were far from glamorous. Their streets were filthy, their hygiene was questionable, and their food choices would make most people gag. From using shared sponges as toilet paper to drinking lead-contaminated water, they unknowingly exposed themselves to disease and poisoning. While Roman culture left behind incredible architecture, laws, and ideas that shaped the world, it also had some of the most unhygienic and bizarre practices in history.